Hope all of you guys enjoyed that. Welcome back. It's the 1:30 session. Hope you all had a good lunch. I'm Ryan. I'm going to be your co-moderator, and now I'm going to call upon my co-moderator to introduce our guests.
We're three moderators together. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ida, and I'm in grade 9.
Okay, Ida. This guy's funny. We met the two of them, and so I don't know if I can actually keep up with them in the moderation today, but it's my pleasure to introduce to you Colin. He's the CEO and founder of Civitas ID. And then we also together, we have Aditya, and he is a partner at, are you ready for this? He used to tell me it's TNBT, and I was like, what does that stand for? It's the next big thing. Last but not least, Amit Sharma. And Amit is global head of partnerships at IDEMIA. So, all right, I'm going to hand over the microphone to my co-moderators, and I hope you guys are ready.
Great.
It's not going to be the easy stuff we do.
All right.
So firstly, thank you for that, because I would have probably struggled with the names, so thank you. So my first question is for Colin. What design choices make a digital identity system dignity first, minimal data, user-controlled, selective disclosure, offline resilience?
When approaching building something new, it's really important to understand your audience that you're looking to serve. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, I hope, later. But last week, Aditya and I actually traveled to the northern part of Kenya and visited a refugee camp that is home to 300,000 people that are living in very vulnerable situations. And I'll go into more detail about it, but we spent time with the users of the product that we're building. And Civitas ID, I don't know how much background you have, is trying to globally help people who've been forcibly displaced from their homes and have had to cross borders to restore their dignity, to be able to access fundamental services around money, around jobs and employment, around health and education, and restoring the documents and the identity credentials that they need to access these vital services. And so when you're setting out to try to solve such a big problem, you have to go deep into understanding your user. And Civitas ID is really focused on three core pillars. One is advocacy. So starting to change the narrative around who these refugees and these migrants are, and that they're not job takers. These are actually job creators, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. We are also looking to look at policy reforms. Where are things gone wrong from a government perspective that's making it difficult for these people to actually restore their dignity and integrate and participate in the economies in which they're living? And the third part is technology. And so your question was getting a little bit at some of the aspects of the technology, which are very important. And when you think about somebody who's had to leave their home, oftentimes in the middle of the night with very little information, being able to create something that's portable, that preserves their sense of control over their data. So something called data sovereignty and decentralized identity, where we house the identity credentials in the phone and they're encrypted unless the user themselves de-encrypts them. Being interoperable, so being able to work across systems. As I mentioned, we're thinking about a number of domains: money, education, employment, health. So every time they want to share their credentials, that the system's going to work. Also being able to be interoperable with government systems. And if they were to leave one national jurisdiction and go to another, that their system will still work. So these principles of portability, of data protection, decentralization, interoperability are all essential design considerations. But as I mentioned earlier, being very clear around who the user is that you're designing for, and having a deep understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. And so hopefully we'll be able to pick up on all these points a little bit more.
You know, one of the most interesting things about when this technology was brought up to me, and this is, you have to know, it's fairly new. We launched at the UN, just as when you guys were part of the UN meetings in September. a lot of the technology tends to be sort of a product in search of a solution, not the other way around. And so to be able to go and meet with the people that you're serving, I thought that was a very unique way of actually managing the technology that you're building. And so I thought that it was very interesting that you approached it that way and that you asked that as your first question. And by the way, I didn't know the questions that we're asking you either, but I'd love for you to carry on. And our two other experts are sort of in the not just the managing operations part of this, because you need to create a coalition of stakeholders that will help you build the product, you know, and get sort of the people on the ground to coalesce around it. But you need the technology itself and understanding if that technology can do no harm, especially with the most vulnerable populations out there. So I'll leave it at that, but I wanted to kind of just tie it back in because it is a complex technology, but usually the technology is not the problem. It's all the surrounding issues. And that over to you to ask your question.
So thank you. My second question is for Amit Sharma. But before I go into this question, I would like to tell you guys the topic for this day, for this session. It's the invisibility crisis, because it links into the question. So Amit, how does invisibility show up in education opportunity, credential, skills, records, access, and what fixes are the most scalable?
Another great question. Let me start by setting a baseline, right? 8+ billion people on the planet, 1 billion plus are born without any identity at all. Literally come into existence, and there's no national, state, provincial, someone saying, you are you, here's a name, here's a certificate. My own father was born in a remote village in India, was born at home. It wasn't until he was 3 or 4 years old where he was given actual status, like the human being recognized as a human and therefore a, quote, citizen of a society, right? So it's 1 billion we're always starting with. Second, the number of individuals that then have to prove their personhood. They may have been recognized by some national authority, and then they have to prove that that they are an individual with this background. And these are some of the folks that when you're talking about migrants, refugees, folks fleeing conflict, humanitarian zones, etc., you not only lose the ability to be verified and validated, even if you were recognized in the first place, but a number of other pieces beyond your specific proof of humanness, that you are an educated individual from this university or college, that you have this work credential to be a doctor or social worker or what have you, those are lost entirely. And so what constitutes my identity is not just that I'm alive and recognized by the societies in which I'm getting engaged in, but by the service providers, the bank, the school, the healthcare provider, that need to recognize and verify and validate that I even exist, right? So that's how it starts. So the invisibility crisis is much bigger than we think it is. In the United States, there are a whole host of cities that have taken in inbound refugees from Afghanistan, Sudan, etc., that were very, very engaged participants in their societies at home and now are completely unrecognizable, even if their proof of personhood is there. So a doctor fleeing conflict can't practice medicine and add value to the society he's in. That's a credential. So it's not your personhood that you can now codify and create as a mobile equivalent on your phone and you can verify and validate yourself, but that I have this credential, I graduated with this certificate, I can do these things professionally, I am authorized to work here. All of the unlocks that happen with those credentials. So that's how credentials start. We can say you are not only who you are, and here are a bunch of attributes that say that, your passport, your national ID, what have you. You have a biometric that you can verify and validate that's matched to that identity. And then here are a bunch of things that constitute who you are. I'm a doctor practicing medicine for 25 years in XYZ country, doing X, Y, and Z for these societies. So the more and more attributes we have, the more we recognize that identity isn't just my physical existence, but what I do, contribute, and how I engage in society. And that's where the design principles come in. The more we can then create credentials that that individual can then prove with their privacy intact, that's what creates a technologically engaged, privacy-enabled credential for the invisible populations across the world.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you all, in very plain words, what does it mean to not have credentials? Sometimes, okay, is credentials, when we think about it, just needing a passport so you can cross countries or continents? What other thing is missing if you don't have a credential?
I'll start and I'll pass it over to Aditya, but it's profoundly dehumanizing. So not only do you have lack of freedom of mobility, you have no rights, you can't vote, you have no protection under the law. So if you get stopped or you get held up by police, there's really no legal recourse that you have. And as we've been talking about, you can't access fundamental services around food and housing and healthcare and things like moving money and holding a bank account or getting a loan, or any of these things that are just so vitally important to be a full participant in any economy, any society.
To add to that, and I hate to start my comments with a dire example to answer that question. When someone doesn't have an identity, the risk of that person falling into a trap of bad actors who will abuse their lack of identity for things like human trafficking, for things that make that person go without perhaps their knowledge into terrorist networks. Those are the even worse aspects of not having credentials that protect you from bad actors. So that's another example of how things can go bad.
I would just add that we often think about credentials as rightly, how do I access critical services, the ability to vote and participate in civic society, the ability to get a bank account for a loan, etc. But the other piece of this is the inability to protect those credentials as being yours makes that exploitation of abuse that much higher. I cannot stress this enough, especially for younger populations that live in a web-native world. You are digitally engaged and your information is on the open web. That threat vector for exploitation is extremely high. And when that gets exploited without the protections of your own credentials, so you only permission it to the service providers and the access channels that you want, that is the power of what credentials can mean. It's not just an ability to then open yourself to critical services, but to protect yourself from the exploitation that I'm telling you is an active business model by the technology infrastructure providers of today. So we have to be able to create a technology that is, in fact, human-centric in that regard for both those reasons.
Thank you so much for those answers. My next question is for Aditya. What's the biggest risk of leaving digital identity to fragmented national systems or private platforms? And what governance model can prevent harm?
That's a great question, and I think I should build on Amit's comments, right? So when we say that there is a credential, where the credentials represent your identity, well, somebody issued those credentials. I don't issue my own credentials. If I call myself Jack Smith, that doesn't make me Jack Smith. But if the government of USA issues a passport which says Jack Smith on it, now I'm Jack Smith, right? Now the question of what happens to them, who's in control of them. Now the question is the government now do they own my credentials? And by owning my credentials, do they own my identity? By owning my identity, do they own my data? By owning my data, do they own me? Well, that doesn't sound right. I own myself. I own my data. I own my credentials. And this principle of the individual being in control of their own data, identity, credentials is what we call in the industry self-sovereign identity, right? Now, self-sovereign identity is a relatively new principle, which folks like Amit and a bunch of others from the industry who are veterans of the industry, we have been working on what we call decentralized identity. So if you're familiar with blockchain and the advantages of what blockchain gives to the internet today that we did not have 10 years ago, it is a similar concept, right? By having decentralized identity, you are allowing the individual to say, it's okay for someone to have a cryptographically secured copy of my credentials somewhere. But only I have the keys to unlock those credentials when they have to be shared with somebody else. So instead of a bank or a social media company or a hospital or even a government storing my credentials in some central place and those being vulnerable to being hacked by somebody, no. Now we're going to store the individual's credentials in their phone. A cryptographically secured copy might be in the cloud, but only the user can unlock them and decide who it will be shared with, which bank it will be shared with, which hospital it will be shared with, which employer it will be shared with my consent. That's what we call self-sovereign identity, and that's the new thing that we'll be doing.
Thank you so much.
I know one of the interesting things that came out in a discussion at the UN was when Ahmed was explaining to me, because I also did not quite understand the self-sovereignty, how it really worked. But you know, Ahmed, I remember you saying you're going somewhere and you need to show ID for entry so that they can verify you are old enough to be into that establishment. Let's say, you know, they need to, you need to be old enough to be drinking, right? Well, they only need to know the year you were born in order to make sure that you belong in the room. But when we show our ID, we show so many more things. We show everything. We show our birthday. We show our, sexual orientation. We show so many different, our picture, the way we look. You know, there's so much more data. So imagine a world where you can turn a switch on and off, and you can show exactly what is needed for that particular place that you're in. And to me, that made so much more sense in this bigger discussion. So it's about being able to provide identity, to have access, to protect yourself, but also in this day and age where information rules everything, not everything needs to be out there in that way. But anyways, thank you so much. And I think we should maybe open it to the room. What do you guys think? Do you have any more questions?
Actually, we have a few more. From Rosenberg. So, because here at Rosenberg, we are creating a youth manifesto on identity digitally. So we have a couple questions on that for you guys. It's all three of you, open circle. That's all right? Sure. So the first one is, from your perspective, where do you see identity taken away or controlled most often? Online, in schools, or in services?
Sorry, say that again. Where do we see it taken away?
Like taken away or like controlled.
Okay.
Most often.
Well, I think to some of the points that Amit was making, that, you know, with and Aditya as well, when governments and big tech companies sort of own all your identity, you really have very little control over what happens with that. And so your identity gets taken away in the sense that you become the product, and you're looking at all of your information to sort of make their products better, and you've sort of given up any sort of control or sovereignty over that data. So I think the two examples I would say are with government and also with big tech. I think the third is bad actors. And so that is, as Amit was alluding to, there's a lot of threat vectors out there online where they're looking to capture information, compromise your credentials, sort of do things, scams to get you to give over your passwords, get access to your phones. And so there's a number of different dimensions by which this is a risk.
Yeah, I would add that to your explicit question, online engagement is often relegated to some of the biggest infrastructure technology providers, right? The Googles, the Metas, the Apples, right? When we go for a critical service online, and often you're trying to register for a conference like here at Davos, and they say, well, would you like to sign in using your Gmail or your Google? Understand that you are providing now the opening for that organization to capture all of the data inputs that you're going to now put in there. That's what's happening online. And so they may not be, quote, illicit actors in the sense that they're trying to deliberately exploit your data, but they are certainly trying to monetize that data. And the more I can understand how you swipe left and right, where your eyes go, what your preferences are, the more I can algorithmically define the content that gets in front of you. And that can be either a good or bad thing. And unfortunately, we are seeing that hate and rage sells. So algorithmically elevated content will be fielded to you to get more clicks. So your identity gets compromised a lot in the online environment because so many services are becoming web native. And understandably so, right? We can get a bank account on our phone. We can access education on our phone. We can access a healthcare practitioner on our phone. So we want more frictionless engagement, easier to access these services. But with frictionless also comes this potential threat of exploitation of those underlying identity attributes. So that's where I think some of the biggest threats are.
And what about from like a youth right perspective for like young people?
So there's youth here in this room, and firstly, thank you for hosting us. I was here for a little bit yesterday, and it is wonderful to see all of you in action. It is wonderful to see the energy, the motivation, how articulate you are all. I think all of you deserve a round of applause. You do. So I want to kind of take your question and maybe open it up for reflection and any even comments. What should youth think about in terms of identity? Now I have two sons, and now they are young men, but they have been your age, and I think about this myself. They were spending most of their non-class time on the athletic fields and very little time on social media. And that has served them well. And I say this with conviction because they are my own kids. And I just want you to think about the amount of time in the day you're spending on social platforms. Not because it's all bad, but like Amit said, they are full of pitfalls and risks. Back to your question, identity. Now, if you know who you are, let's say you have a certain self-profile of yourself. I'm an actor, like we saw before this session. I want to get into drama. I'm going to be a Hollywood star one day. Okay, that is your self-identification. But imagine now you spend, let's say, 8 hours in a day browsing for snowshoes. Now suddenly Google thinks that you might be an entrepreneur who wants to start a snowshoe business. Now you have allowed them to think of you as an entrepreneur in snowshoes, which is as far from the truth as it possibly is. Look at what has happened. That algorithm is now defining your identity on the internet. How stupid is that? Right? That is the reason youth have to be particularly careful as to how are they allowing technology companies to potentially incorrectly identify youth as someone who they might not be. Just one example, as to how you can be careful.
Great.
And I think open circle is a good idea. This next question now. So us at Rosenberg, we've also been discussing like the key non-negotiables young people want to protect in the Youth Manifesto. For example, like consent, opt-outs, transparency, appeal, human support. In your view, anyone here can answer, which would be the most important out of these? And are there any that are overlooked?
Do you want me to answer, or do you want to open it up to? Yeah, I mean, I would just start with like consent and really understanding your settings and your personal protections are really important. Like just letting anyone access your information if you're on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, X now, I guess, and Instagram. I mean, like all of these things are just like you're just exposing yourself. So really understand your privacy settings. I would try to set them as strictly as possible. And also when you make sure that you're consenting and opting out on things like, with cookies. Now I always go and I reject all those cookies. You're not allowing these big tech companies to be tracking everything you do.
Thank you. I think I'm going to ask another open circle question. Oh, sorry, did you have an answer?
I just want to give my own perspective. And I think that the algorithm can definitely manipulate us teenagers to think of reality differently. Like, for example, say I see a video on TikTok and has 1 million likes. And us teenagers are very like vulnerable in the way that we believe everything we see. We take it as evidence. So if we see something and we think it's relatable, we see that video with like 1 million likes, but we don't see the one that contradicts it with also 1 million likes, because it's so fixed to your reality and your perceptions. And I think this could definitely be this can definitely break a lot of like beliefs and truths within the society, because we spend so much more time on social media than we do in real life. So then we bring what we see on social media to real life conversations, and that creates misperceptions. So.
Thank you. So I have another question for anyone in the room can answer. So today, where do you see people becoming invisible in systems today? And what's one right or safeguard that would change that?
I think given the ease with which you can create artificial personalities and artificial influencers and AI slop intermingled with that, and people are leaning on that because you can use it everywhere. You can use it to pass an exam. You can use it to ace a job interview. You can use it to become popular and get all that sweet, sweet attention money. Then the need for proof of human knowledge and authentic identity, so you're not, we already lose all the signal in the noise. What happens when the signal of humanity is lost in the noise of AI-generated personalities and content? So that invisibility is something that is concerning.
Thank you.
Would you mind if I also just kind of give a little bit of a personal story of our visit last week? And
of course.
And so when we went into this refugee camp that I was talking to you about, there were a lot of things that fit with the public narrative around it was crowded, it was hot, it was dusty. Like people were living in makeshift homes with metal roofs, and like the sun was beating down, so you know how hot it was inside. People were gathered around on streets, and we'd go through these potholes that literally a car could fall into the pothole. And we're going through these streets, and street after street after street. But then you'd come into these villages, and they were bustling with like shops that the refugees were setting up, and they were selling things that they were making. And so I was kind of driving through thinking like, this is unfortunately kind of what I expected. But then we went into a conference room, and we were introduced to a number of the leaders of the refugee communities, and we were simply blown away. They were asking us, we showed them our prototype of the app that we built, which we'd be happy to share with anyone after, but they were asking us like, what coding language were we using? Are we using agentic AI? It looks like your pixels are off on that design. Who did your user journeys? And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is like so disconnected from what I said. One woman was a filmmaker, and she tells refugee stories, and she posts them on YouTube. And I looked around the room, and I saw these incredibly curious, bright, like switched on people. One of them was offering us coders to help us code our app. And I'm thinking to myself, this is horrible that you're trapped here. And this is what the lack of identity. And one woman had been there for 24 years. She practically grew up in that camp setting and had sort of normalized it. And I said, we've got to help get you out. And this is what we're doing at Civitas Ideas, really to help create a pathway out of that environment for these incredibly talented people. And I'll just leave you with one last thing is, when I said in the beginning, when I think about design choices, part of what we do is advocacy, but it is shifting that narrative, letting the world know that some of the smartest people that could be the next CEO of Google or Meta, that are sitting in those refugee camps. And how do we help them by giving them the identity documents that they need to move into a better life?
I'll just add. There's been a assumption from the gray-haireds. I'm one, right? That the technological innovation and move to mobile will expand commercial activity, and that's a net positive, right? If you have more economics, companies are growing because you're engaging services and enabling services online. That's net good. We have to really be asking ourselves, and what I'm really encouraged by youth today is asking ourselves, is it really though a net positive if we've got economic growth if we also have 3 times self-harm rates and 5 times suicide rates between 16 and 30. That is a net negative. Second, we have to think about our identities equally as being both offline and online. And what I fear is that with all of these web native engagements, which we are doing, we're trying to put identities in the palms of people's hands, in their devices, so that they can own and control them, is that we lose and sometimes overinflate the importance of our online engagement, which comes with all of the manipulations we can drive and all of the comparisons, like the TikTok video examples, right? That we then want to meet, engage, have that same wealth, have that same experience, etc., because we see these and often fabricated online engagements. With AI now, we don't even know if it's real. So the encouragement is to really think about identity from the offline context, and how do we ensure the humanization of that identity in our online engagements, knowing about these algorithms and all these other pieces. That's where the design features that youth can bring, being digitally native, can help us old guys design systems, fund systems that actually work to the design principles that we want for our future generations. Everything we do is through the lens of our kids. Everything. And I will just say, the refugee examples are great. It's also relevant for that 24-year-old, out of work, single male that's sitting in a basement playing online games, that is disaffected, doesn't believe they have a future, that the world's against them, etc., is also invisible. So we have to think about invisibility in that sort of broader context.
Thank you. By the way, can I just say, I really like how you always pick out like real examples. Like, for example, how you said your father was born in a village in India. I can relate because my father was also born in a village in India. And the depressed, or not depressed, but 24-year-old in this room. I really like this. So to close everything off, can I get one sentence each, one dignity first principle you'll advocate for, and one concrete change you make in the next 30 days for your organization?
In the next 30 days, we're going to be presenting to the government of Kenya a proposal to make actually about 12 policy reforms that will allow 1 million people to start to enter into the full economy of the country. So that's one of the things we're committing to.
Next 30 days. People think of helping refugees as a charity or only a humanitarian problem. We think about refugees as not people who are takers, but who are givers of value. And our goal here with the work we are doing is to make sure that we are bringing their productivity and their talent into the economic mainstream of the countries where they are hosted. So what is the goal for the next 30 days? We want to flip the script from this population being dependent on $8 to this population generating new revenue streams from service providers who will benefit from these populations and be willing to have a self-sustaining, revenue-producing, profit-generating, capitalist enterprise which is not dependent on $8. That is the goal that we're giving ourselves for the next 30 days.
They were very comprehensive, so it's very hard to follow them. I will reiterate Aditya's point earlier about this room. Every time I, go through my sort of rabbit holes of depression in terms of the state of the world, I then stumble upon groups like this that make me incredibly optimistic. If you are inheriting the problems that we are creating, I am incredibly optimistic that we will have a bright future because of the talent and just articulation of questions here. Mine is kind of related but very specific, which is, in the next 30 days, how do we rethink wealth and value creation well beyond and outside economics? Wealth and well-being must be benchmarked outside of economics. Economics is important, but it's only one criteria.
So thank you so much. I hope you guys achieve your goals. Can we get a round of applause for our guests? Thank you for listening.